Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about medieval board games. Now this doesn't mean board games that were invented in the medieval ages, which would actually also be kind of cool, but rather board games that have medieval times as a theme or as part of them. We see a lot of games that involve building castles and cities and all this kind of thing, appeasing feudal lords, that sort of stuff, and there's just a whole bunch of them out there. And essentially for me personally, I wanted to share my own personal favorites for you guys, where for me, I like to see things that are at least reasonably realistic, something that's actually going on, something that shows a little bit of history, something along those lines, typically at least. I'm not a huge fan of really outlandish stuff when it comes to this type of a theme, but of course, I want to hear what you guys have to say. What are your personal favorites that use a medieval theme? There's a whole lot of them out there. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, but with that, we're going to jump right in with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Carcassonne. So this is a game that is about city building and farm building and road building and all this kind of stuff, and it won the Game of the Year 20 years ago. Just let that sink in for a second. That said, it's a great game. I am just personally not a huge fan of it, but as far as the medieval aspect to it, you really can't beat the idea of having your abbeys and your bridges and your castles and all of this, that, and the other type of thing. And of course, this was also one of the first games that I ever purchased for my own personal collection, so it's rather near and dear to me personally. But that said, it is still a great game. It still has some great strategy to it, and it's one of those things where, depending on how you combine the different expansions and stuff, it's very difficult to get bored with it. I don't play it too often anymore, but it is a good game, and it does have that medieval theme, and the imagery as well really is reminiscent of the old school castles and brick and mortar and all of that kind of stuff, not to mention the poor farmers that have fallen down in the middle of the fields. Carcassonne, my number 5. At number 4, I've got Paladins of the Western Kingdom. First off, this one's relatively unique because it's actually part of a series of games that includes this one, the Architects of the Western Kingdoms as well. And the idea of this particular one is that it's a worker placement game where the idea is that you're not only trying to build up fortifications to defend yourself against Vikings and Byzantine raiders and all of this kind of thing, but at the same time you're also trying to spread faith and all of this other kind of stuff while the Paladins are coming to try and save everybody. And I find that this really captures the idea of what the medieval times were all about, which was about spreading your own personal beliefs as much as humanly possible, and also protecting your own people as much as humanly possible. It really captures that very, very well in a wonderfully small box with a great game, solid mechanics, some decent worker placement, which normally I'm not a big fan of, and that's honestly why, the only reason why it's so low on the list. But overall, a very good game, a ton of fun. Paladins of the Western Kingdom, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Orlean. This is a game that is fairly stereotypical in this region of gaming, in that you are trying to build a medieval city. And in this particular case, it's a worker placement game, but the reason that this is higher up on the list is because I think that this captures the idea of the medieval era a little bit more and a little bit more comprehensively than some of the other games, because you're talking about building, you're talking about trading, you're talking about faith, and you're talking about scholarly pursuits as well. So you actually have scientists who are doing research to help everything. You've got people who are trying to trade, people who are trying to make the food, people who are trying to do all of this kind of stuff, as well as build the buildings and all of this kind of thing, as well as upgrade. And this is really what a lot of the medieval times were about. It was about making the castles and the areas better and better and better, especially compared to your neighbors. And of course, in the end, that's what it's all about, and the fact that you have to be better than your neighbors in order to win the game. Now, I'm not a huge fan of worker placements overall, but I think that this is a great implementation of it. It was huge on Kickstarter. I was really glad to get a copy of it. Orlean, my number 3. At number 4, I've got Shadows over Camelot. Now, I know this is a much more fantastical version and it's not really necessarily grounded in reality, but the fact is that I love stories. I love legends and myths and all of that kind of stuff, and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table is probably one of the most well-known stories in history. And the fact is, it takes place during the medieval era, and you have the idea of the good versus evil and trying to find the Holy Grail, combat against the Picts and the Saxons trying to invade, the Black Knight, all of the bad guys with Guinevere and all of these bad sort of people, the treachery mechanic that goes on in the game, and all of it is so well done. I absolutely adore it. It's a very tremendously well done game, and it does truly require a lot of cooperation amongst all of the knights that are playing. And so it feels like what I would imagine the medieval times feels like, in terms of it's pretty much hopeless unless you get some help. But that said, it's a great game overall. You've got your King Arthur and you've got your wonderful stories, and the stories don't end up ending with somebody who's named after a fibrous muffin becoming king simply because he has some good stories. Spoiler alert. But that said, Shadows over Camelot is my number 2. At number 1, I've got Shogun. This is, for me personally, the most complex game that I have played that takes place in the medieval era, where this is all about essentially medieval Japan and the fact that you had the different feudal lords and the dynamos that were trying to take control of the land as they went around and all this kind of thing. So this game is actually more combat focused than it is focused on building up your resources and all that kind of stuff, but you do both. And so it's really great in that sense, because this kind of captures, in my opinion, more of what the medieval era was about. It was about fighting for land, it was about fighting for honor, it was about fighting for faith, and it was about fighting for your people in order to help them survive. So this has a unique mechanic as far as resolving the combat, which is kind of cool. And in general, I personally have the big box, so it's got a bunch of the expansions, so it's very replayable in my personal case. And on top of that, just like the Arthurian legends of Shadows over Camelot, I am a big fan of the stories and legends of Eastern Asia and Japan and all of that kind of stuff, and I love the historical aspect that this brings to it. So all in all, Shogun is my number 1. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my 5 favorite medieval themed board games. Again, this is a truly enormous category because a lot of games involve castles and building feudal lands and all of this sort of thing. And you can even see on my shelf right next to me that there's a bunch of different games that fit directly into that category that I personally didn't pick. These are my own picks because I find them to be a little bit more historically interesting, or interesting in terms of how they present stories and legends and stuff like that. But of course, as always, I'm curious what you guys have to think. Let me know anything and everything in the comments below, because I love to hear it all, what your favorites are, why they're your favorites, and obviously mentioning what you think about my own picks. So put it all down in the comments. As always as well, please take a look at my various social media pages if you have not already done so, where you can interact with my channel and me in a whole bunch of really fun ways. And of course, as we are still battling COVID, keep down, we are moving, we are fighting, and hopefully by the end of the summer we will be able to be back to somewhat normal practices, with being able to go out, go into places, and actually interact with people face to face without too much worry. So we can hope for it. We'll see how it goes. But with all of that, thank you so much for watching. Hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.